Hi, everybody. This is Conversations and Translations, and you listening to me, Franklin Esau. Conversations and Translations is where a conversation is real and the dive
I
is
would
deep.
make up the story that young men getting this kind of broader sex education, which includes biology and reproduction and consciousness, can catapult the young man into a very different adult place than they might have been had they not gotten that conversation. And most of us, and I think I was lucky in a way because I had some of that conversation, but most of the men that I've met over the years were not lucky enough to have that conversation and wish that they had that conversation. So that's a gift that we can give to the next generation.
I would really love for many guys to have this book. This is an awesome book, and it has really, I kid you not, and I didn't notice it. It was when you started to speak about it. I think that one of the things that I've learned in when you had a conversation about me, about my sexuality, I think one of the things that I really are learning to do now is that how do I exist in my marriage with sex being, it is there, but it's not like in the door. It's not like the main one. I think that what and that's why I feel a lot of times I feel that I'm not doing such a good job. It messes with my ego a bit, but I try to bring a sense of to be a security. I'm trying to be compassionate. I'm trying to be a lot of those other stuff. And since that I'm very young in that phase,
Absolutely.
It kind of like hits a bit hard sometimes. I sometimes feel that I'm failing in the marriage, I'm failing in the relationship. But I understand it to be because I'm just starting to practice the sex in the background, or the sexuality of our relationship in the background. I'm just starting that
Amazing.
off. But I'm noticing that once you talked about how we as men would need to find in relationships, we need to find ourselves out. Who are we outside our sexuality to our partners? I love it.
Go ahead. It's a great practice, Franklin. And as I was saying in the interview, it's a journey. It's with SmilingOne, responsible individual work, it's a journey, and it's enough to be on the journey. You don't have to get to the destination, because the journey itself offers an incredible richness towards the colorful tapestry of relating on a deeper level. So already once you take your first step across the line and you engage on that journey, you forget about the destination. Just be on the journey. Just be in the present on the journey. And you've entered into an extraordinary place. Extraordinary being out of the ordinary. Out of the ordinary.
I'm having more conversations about this. So my friend called me yesterday, and he says that for the first time in his life, and he thinks it started once he started speaking to me. He had a partner, and he's been chasing, and he had this partner, and this partner actually forced him to have intimacy, because why, for him it was the act and gone, the act and run off, the act and then I don't see you anymore. And this for the first time, and he said he thinks it changed because why, he was starting to have, and I was just having the responsible individual conversations. I was not having sex and sexuality per se. And I think that once you start having conversations about these things, you open up a whole new window, a whole new world for you to explore and to see where things go from there. I think that one of the key things that I must say is that I've never felt so free from sex and sexuality. It used to always been this heavy load that was always on my shoulder, and I couldn't really navigate it, because why, as you have also mentioned, and that even the world, even the book, in the introduction, the book speaks about how the differences of cultural backgrounds of countries and east and west, how there's so much difference in word sex and our sexuality, understanding it. I think that in my understanding and building up and making these assumptions about it, because why, sometimes you take a movie, sometimes you take a book, sometimes you take a song as to being conclusive, is being absolute knowledge. That's how it should be. And
Absolutely.
of course, why we as men, we go along with that and making it up. And we say, oh, this way works. I'm getting things right with this way. We kind of like stick to that being our way. And since opening myself up with a book and learning more phrases, understanding more things about myself, I think sex and sexuality is not so heavy on me, and it hasn't become such a sensitive issue, subject. I feel I'm, because when I'm open now, I feel that there's a lot of more opinions that I would like to hear. There's a lot of more things I would like to find out. I'm actually curious now about understanding and learning more about it.
Yeah. That's amazing, Franklin. And in the language of the book, what you're doing is you're sticking a glitch in the sticky matrix. So there's this matrix, as I say, that we inherit as we go through puberty. Think about it. Before puberty, right? Probably you are not that interested in sex. All of a sudden at puberty, you get a tsunomic dose of testosterone. Your brain is ready and waiting for it. And then things that were not interesting before become very interesting, particularly as it pertains to females and fantasy. So that is, I describe in the book as a hologram. It's now, there's an appearance of reality in front of us, which brings sex front and center to our awareness and our consciousness, so that we can't really see very much of what's on the other side of it, and everything is according to it. The meaning we make of our life is according to it. At the same time, our brain is busy developing, and we've got this very strong hologram that's busy formatting as we go along through our adolescence. When you have this aha moment that you acquire through reading Sext, the book, or reading another book that awakens to allowing you to look beyond these sides of the high walls of sex and sexuality, you are putting a glitch in the matrix. So the matrix is not informing you as much as it did before. You're allowing something else to inform you, and that something else, by virtue of its power and constancy, can reduce the amplification or the noise of the matrix, the sex matrix. And that allows us all as men to bring other aspects of ourselves to the relationship, to the world, to our kids, to our business lives, because we've opened up the landscape of who we thought we were.
Yes, and I can see how that one works. There was last year Women's Month, and SmilingOne, me and Karina, and we gave flowers to the women and the girls. And I said, well, actually, Karina, I have never done this. And if I would have done it, it would have been to the conclusion of ending on a date or something, somewhere romanticized, or just to fill a fantasy. And we were busy, we were doing all of the teachers, all of the girls, and there was no ulterior motive. And then I said to Karina, you know what? I've never felt so pleased with myself for giving someone just a flower. I felt so felt so happy. I felt so vibrant. It was almost like I was doing charity in the community, you know. And it really showed that once you come out of the norm, or really the patterns that we as men have developed, it is a bit of an ease, and you as a man and as a human being opens up to just new ways of being, the new ways.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's very freeing. It's very freeing.
And in calming the chaos, and I think that the primary hindrance is how to connect with the maturity of our masculinity. It's not just to be sexual beings, is also to ensure a certain type of sense of security, a sense of togetherness, focusing on other aspects besides sex and sexuality. How do we as men, or how does chapter 7 invite us into calming the chaos revolving around sex and sexuality?
So chapter 7 looks at this concept of what I call naive sexualism, or maybe even junior sexualism. It's the level 1 basic kind of sexuality that you alluded to, that's fed us in society, which negates the human aspect of what lies deeper in us. Before I answer that question, I want to just mention that it's not just a matter of dropping the way that we think about our sex and sexuality and going off to find the other things. When we dive more deeply into all of the other things that inform our sexuality, the quality of our sex and sexuality and our intimacy actually begins to change, even though perhaps we never imagined that it would, or that we did something in particular to change it. It's really when our consciousness around sex changes, then the quality that we bring to our partner of who we are changes. And quite often she can feel that, because very often women have a deeper sensate capacity around feeling our presence or not when we're intimate. So in chapter 7, I dig a little bit deeper to the alluding to becoming aware of the strings that pull us at puberty, pull us this way and that way, and point to the fact that we are introduced to what I call is a holographic hypersexual hyperspace. In other words, we're going at hyperspeed towards sex and masturbation at the time of puberty. And a lot of that hyperspace traveling informs us as adults about what sex is. And so calming that chaos, calming that hyperspeed nature of it, requires that we notice many of the illusions, the other illusions that live in our current life, and particularly the illusions, the stories that we've made up about women. So the Calming the Chaos chapter 7, is designed to prepare us for chapter 8, which is the workbook. So the workbook takes us through a number of practices, which ends with practices with our partners. And the chapter 7 really just wakes us up to perhaps the illusionary nature that we've made up about sex, and helps us to quieten that noise down, that chaos down somewhat in our lives.
Yes, because when I think about it, sex and the chemistry, or just the attraction to the opposite sex really happens on a very high frequency that sometimes elevates us to a nervousness, a scariness, a cautiousness. So yeah, definitely, it's in understanding more about ourselves, we calm, or we bring ourselves to a presence where we actually understand more and are more confident in who we are in our sexual beings. What I wanted to talk about, and I really want to emphasize that this conversation today about sex and sexuality is mainly for us as men, and heterosexual men, along with females, or for the females, really awaken. And yesterday we did spoke about, do I use the word landscape? As I'm having this conversation to you, I can really see where the landscape comes in, and how wide we should really, as men, should have a landscape of understanding to our sexuality, sex and our sexuality. And I really want us as men and heterosexual men with sex and intimacy and the conscious relationship that we have, because why we are looking at so many aspects that are yet to be healed, that are to grow. And I want you to speak about it, Paul. How do we, or what lies behind for us as men wanting to wake up and widen our landscape in regards to sex and sexuality?
I think we've mentioned a lot of that. Sometimes what feels like a difficult journey, Franklin. It's really to make the decision to want to inquire further and to want to change. And hopefully, as a heterosexual man, if you're with a partner, she's also very supportive of the journey for you as a man. And even better, if she's on her own journey herself, that can be helping your relationship into a completely different orbit. So what I've tried to do in the book is to offer a very organized roadmap for men to dip in and out of the book and to make macro or micro changes as they feel comfortable, and to go away and explore a sentence here, a word there, to go out into the world, to notice how we as men tend to sexualize the world, to notice the fantasies that pop into our head, to notice our distractions. There is such a rich and tapestried layer of discovery here, which I truly feel has been left out of the cultural discussion, that awaits not only the education of our young boys, but opportunity for us as men to become the elders, perhaps who we didn't have, who couldn't impart this knowledge to us because why that conversation had not woken up, or this particular Goldilocks zone of opportunity hadn't yet shown itself from a historical perspective. But people feel to be much more open to receiving this conversation and inquiring and looking into themselves more deeply and really wanting to know what the heck is going on, when the offered cultural conversations around sex and relationship and love don't seem to be working out so well for people.
And it's a beautiful, might I say, I'm not saying it's an alternative, but it's a beautiful option. It's a beautiful window. It's a beautiful lane. My second last question. I'm just curious to ask you this question because I work with many young boys, many teenagers, and I know how sometimes the question of sex and sexuality can be so complex for the young mind, or there seems to be a lot of things that as an adult that you need to filter in order to bring the language or bring the understanding across. I read in the book how you have discovered a few things, and I'm not in the mid-20s, early 20s, and an 11-year-old, you were on this journey and you had these beautiful questions about sex and sexuality, and your early 20s year old says to yourself that I finally discovered a wording, I finally discovered things, I finally discovered concepts that the 11-year-old could not have understand. How do we as older men really bridge the gap to finding that niche or finding that language to kind of carry forward an education and a conversation around sex and sexuality to our young boys and young men?
Crucial question, Franklin, and I think that we haven't done well as a human species in growing our young men up in a particular way that it evokes a level of sexual awareness that they can bring out into the world and integrate into their own lives. I think it's important for men who are passing the information on to have done some of the journey themselves and to have some connection and understanding to their own 11, 12, 13-year-old inside them in order to connect and to expand the conversation with other young men who are going through puberty. But there is a whole review of sex education, particularly for young men, that I think would be well to be taken under the microscope, because I would make up the story that young men getting this kind of broader sex education, which includes biology and reproduction and consciousness, can catapult the young man into a very different adult place than they might have been had they not gotten that conversation. And most of us, and I think I was lucky in a way because I had some of that conversation, but most of the men that I've met over the years were not lucky enough to have that conversation, and wished that they had that conversation. So that's a gift that we can give to the next generation.
And thank you so much for gifting that gift to me, because you've done wonders being on my part and really opened myself up to the conversation of sex and sexuality. This is Conversations and Translations, and you're listening to me, Franklin Esau. Conversations and Translations is where the conversation is real and the dive is deep. See you again next time.